Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Dupuy. I have a PhD in learning disabilities. I do diagnostic assessment, advocacy, and intervention. I'm also an adult with dyslexia and dysgraphia.
Hi, my name is Kim Sharman. I work with kids who have dyslexia, dysgraphia, and ADHD and all ages. And I've been doing this, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And I'm an adult with ADHD.
And today we're actually going to talk a little bit about ADHD, like what happens in childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood, right?
This
So
is
go
it's
ahead.
a big deal. And I keep running into parents who don't understand it and what it means.
Yeah.
And it is genetic.
So one of the best presentations I've ever seen and scariest presentations I ever seen was done by Russell Barkley. I went to a Learning in a Brain conference and he presented. He actually got a standing ovation after, which I've never seen at any conference, anybody getting a standing ovation. But he wrote a book on adult outcomes of ADHD, and he said in his presentation that he views ADHD to be the most severe mental health issue he has encountered, even above things like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, in part because of how pervasive and intertwined and complex the diagnosis is. So ADHD is not just about interpersonal relationships, it's about money management, it's about ability to get education, it's about ability to maintain a job, it's about maintaining personal relationships. It's about planning into the future, right?
Taking care of your multiple children.
Yeah. So
Many.
let's talk about what we see. Like in early childhood, we see kids that are inattentive, inability to sit in a classroom. But the difference in elementary school is most of the time, the academic expectations many kids can work with because there's not this long-term planning. Like you don't have necessarily research papers and books to read in the same way. Now, it's not that there's none of that, but it's at a much smaller level and it's much more here's your homework packet, get it turned in by Monday. And there's and maybe I'm incorrectly perceiving this, but I think there's more tolerance and acceptance in elementary school for kids that um,
Hmm.
have a hard
Tolerance.
time
Yeah.
managing focus. Like, oh, that's early childhood. Of course, that's what we see. Or that's later childhood. Of course, that's what we see. And
I
that's
mean,
just
you
the
get a
kid
little
learning
tiny
the
bit of a
discipline.
break. Yeah, or he's just a boy and he's just being active and physical. You get a little bit of a break, maybe kindergarten first, but it starts to become a problem then too.
So, to that perception, I would actually say that we see implications of it. I mean, we've talked about this. We have a mutual student that their ability to do higher level math is affected in part because of their inability to double check their work. Would you agree?
If I'm thinking of the same person, yes.
Um, and that's beginning to whittle away at his self esteem. Would you agree?
I feel that self-esteem is one of the first things to go with ADHD. And I don't think parents realize nobody wants to put their kids on drugs. Nobody wants to, just follow the quote ADHD path. But what happens is that it starts to attract negative attention, and that negative attention becomes internalized.
And our brighter kids can often compensate around it. Um, Other kids get kind of written off and pigeonholed. And so while it's not as glaring an issue, the subtleties are still there. So I don't want to imply that there aren't any issues in elementary school, but they're often more easily dismissed and overlooked. Um, and you have all this reluctance. You and I both have a good friend who worked in my office who was reluctant to put her son on stimulant medication. He's so little, I'll move him to another school, we'll survive. And then when she finally put her son on stimulant medication in fourth grade, she was like, okay, I get it.
Yeah. You had to convince me. to do it
Yeah.
for my job. Yeah. And I didn't understand why she was angry every single day I picked her up from school. And you explained to me that all day long, she is working so hard to be a good girl in middle school and keep the blinders on and focus and learn complex information. And then, so that this concentration thing is competing with also this ability to try to comprehend and learn. And it's exhausting. And people are throwing red balls at her head. All the stimulation, that's what it feels like to me, is that people are throwing things at my head while I'm trying to learn.
And so I talk about it either as you have a really thick filter or you have no filter. And when you have a really thick filter, that's where you're like hyper focused doing like I'm playing video games or I'm crafting or I'm doing sports and I'm in my zone and I don't have to worry about anything and I can just do what I'm passionate about and just kill it, right? And so you can have that hyper focused time. But then the rest of the time when there's no filter there, you don't differentiate. The teacher is telling me that there's a quiz tomorrow and the kid is in the back of the room breaking a pencil.
Or
Right.
wandering off into another world.
Right. One of my favorite descriptions ever is one of my kids said, yeah, when I get bored, I go to Eraser World in my head. And she had a whole like set of characters and she had a way to kind of mentally escape when she
Yep.
couldn't maintain her focus.
Yeah.
Okay. So early education wise, the implications of this are
Negative attention,
mhm,
um, inability to learn some of what is it called, worldly knowledge and foundational knowledge that
right.
really starts kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, and they miss it.
Yes. So we have really significant foundational gaps in skill set that we then often have to go back and reteach to catch the student up. And while it seems like a minor cost, it actually has significant implications, right?
Very significant, because they're constantly, I think of it as climbing up a hill, and the rocks and the dirt are loose, and they're just always trying to keep going, but they're always behind.
And
And they're,
everybody else is walking up the nice trail, and it's like, oh, I'll just step over the log. And this
yeah,
kid's like sliding halfway back down the hill.
it's very what's the word? Depressing.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about what we see in middle school, because that's
Oh
where the
boy.
wheels really start to come off the bus.
In middle school, there are so many executive functioning skills required with these long-term projects and these multi-paragraph essays. And first of all, they're not executive functioning skills, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like you have a goal and you can plan backwards and
Right.
set up your organizational skills to get to that goal.
So the classic of that is do a book report. Figure out what book you're going to read a certain number of pages, finish it in time to do your project, get your all the pieces that you need to do the project. If you're doing a diorama, or you're doing a book cover, or you're writing an essay, you get all those pieces together, you do it, and then you get it done in time to turn in. And you don't recall that you have to do it at 11 p.m. the night before it's due, and you haven't even finished the book.
So you just brought in the second big thing, besides the fact of negative self-image, the anxiety, I don't know with the chicken or the egg, but the anxiety that's produced from ADHD is so debilitating. And then it makes the people want to keep avoiding those projects that they have
Right,
to look
right. The other great challenge that you have in middle school is now you're seeing multiple teachers,
at. Mm-hmm.
and multiple teachers tend to handle homework in different ways, tend to handle tests in different ways, right? So you can go into one class, be super structured, you know where everything is, and then you go to another class, that teacher could be structured or unstructured, but could have a different way of doing it. And you have to remember from class to class to class to class. Now, a problem that we have in our school system is that you have three different systems for handling the process of getting grades. So you have it posted in one place, it scores in another place, and then it shows up in a transcript in the third place. And so tracking what's happening between all three environments,
Three systems.
it's a nightmare. So kids think that they've done something and they don't check in all three places to make sure everything is done. And then they're like, but I turned that in. It's all good. Where's the problem? And the parents are like, you didn't do this, right? And you get into the blame situation. Why did you choose to intentionally not do your homework so that I then have to yell at you about this, right?
Well, and can we talk about the now? There's two types of time for ADHD people, now and not now.
Now, yeah,
And the fact that I explained to my kids, they sometimes they'll get their homework done, but they don't go through. There's another system. I don't know if you were including that, but there's a system where you have to go through a bunch of different buttons and screens to actually turn the homework into this queue for the teacher.
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh my God. And for me as an ADHD person, we had paper, so I could see my paper and turn it in, but it's not like that. This is so the now and not now is I finished my homework, I'm done. And then they forget about, oh, I still have to do 5 more steps to turn it in.
Right. And we often make assumptions that kids will remember how to label Word documents and know how to store documents to find things,
I don't know how to do that. Yeah.
right? And so the mound continues to grow of all of these things are missing. It's all now past due. It's all worth points, but I don't know what to do and why. And what we typically see is kids get overwhelmed and then they shut down and then they have no way to get out the other side, right?
And
And
then
they're
depression kicks in.
and then depression kicks in. And
Yep.
if they go tell their parents they're underwater,
I
and
get
I
yeah.
don't want to imply that all parents are like grumpy grouches over this, but as an adult who um, I have expertise in this, right? I've been doing this for a very long time. My husband has pretty severe attention deficit. I should know better, but he pushes my buttons. And I have days where I just do a meltdown on him. And I'm a professional and I understand the wiring and I understand everything else. And so, parents out there who don't understand all of this and have the depth and breadth of knowledge, their frustration keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And it's like, what else can I try? What else can I do? You don't want me in here. And yet I see the wheels coming off the bus, right?
Yes. It's
And so you as a parent don't want to be punitive and dismissive and talk down, um, but it can still happen in subtle ways, and you may not be doing it, but society may be doing it to your child when
yeah.
you couldn't get your homework turned in.
Yeah, it's pretty upsetting when I do have parents come in and say my kid's just lazy. I never had a problem with that. I didn't even know I was ADHD until I had my second child, which Cindy mentioned it to me. But but so that's the thing. But and it's not, parents don't understand. It's not that my kid doesn't have the ability to have attention. They can have great attention. But
Get
what I show,
regulated.
yeah, what I show for people is it's this. I try to teach kids, you can't do this. This is too devastating for you when you're down here. And this is where the self-awareness comes in, that with ADHD, I call them in biking rollers. So I want you to have these where you're starting to go down the hill, but you have that ability to self-check and be self-aware. Now, to do that, you have to have your medication to help you stand back and look at the big picture. If you don't have your ADHD medication, what happens is you don't see
Cycle.
you don't see this is happening.
Right.
It is just so devastating. I had a kid do this his senior year. He was doing great at the beginning of the semester, turn everything in, and he said, "Oh, I can let things slide." All of a sudden, he looks and he's ready to graduate, and they say, "You're not going to graduate."
Well, and by the way, that sine wave is not just during a day, that's during a week, that's during a school year. Like you
Right?
have this fluctuation that is going on constantly, and kids. So Barkley says adults without attention deficit can plan 3 months in advance. Adults with attention deficit can plan 3 days in advance.
But that's not true for me because I figured out a way around my ADHD.
You have engaged in executive function skills and you've engaged in strategies to help you think through that, right? But there are kids out there that can't see into the future, right? And part of your, would you say that it has benefited you to work with kids over the years that have attention deficit to build more advanced strategies
I
yourself?
have, well, first of all, I have great empathy for them. And because I have no ego, I tell them about things that I do and mistakes I've made. And one of the things I explained to them, I said, listen, kids, I didn't like the process of billing. So I would work and do all this tutoring for an entire week. And I said, I wouldn't bill your parents because the process of going through the billing process was so boring, tedious, and horrific for me. I just was working for free. I said, that's silly. But that's what happens when I can't maintain this attention and follow through on things. And I always say to parents, an ADHD person is in the middle of a little, like a baby tornado. They're in the middle of the cyclone. So they can't really see what's going on around them or see the big picture. The ADHD medication for me allowed me to stand outside of the little cyclone and I could say, oh, I see what's happening. I need to start getting back to my homework or I need to start planning for this big project that's coming. But
Yes.
it's hard to see it when you're in the middle of the little cyclone.
Well, okay, so let's go back to this planning in advance. So when we're talking to middle school kids about maintaining grades and the importance of maintaining grades, all they can see is what's in front of me now. I'm surviving, so what's the problem? What are the implications? And I give them, so the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And if you can't get your homework done and get it done on time, how are you going to work in a job and get your projects done on time, right? If you can't pay attention during a lecture, how are you going to pay attention during a meeting to know what you're supposed to do and when things are due and expectations and the whole nine yards? So, to that end, in middle school, we start developing different patterns of behavior, and those follow you into high school. And we're trying to turn the Titanic, we're trying to turn this big ship and change those habits and behaviors, which can be challenging. And so we continue to do that. And then we'll get into college and nobody's checking up on you. And we have these issues. So, so those are kind of the academic and you have kids when they get to college not planning in advance to study for tests, not getting their work done on time or doing it at the last minute, missing class or showing up to class late, all of these implications. So that's kind of the academic piece. Let's talk about money and attention deficit.
Oh
What are
boy.
some issues with money and attention deficit, Kim?
Well, if you are not figuring out what's coming in and what's going out, it's going to be really, we haven't really talked about impulsivity, which is one major aspect.
That's
And
exactly where I was going.
yeah, impulsivity. It's like, I want that thing, but I only have, I'm at college and I only have $200 and I need it for, books next semester or whatever it is. You
Or
know,
somebody comes up and says, hey, if you sign up for this credit card, you will get a free water bottle. Oh, I didn't bring my
oh,
water bottle today. I'll get a free
yeah,
water bottle. I'll sign up for this. I don't have any implications, right? I don't see how what I'm doing here has this long term effect. And companies intentionally make low friction purchase. Like, do you remember having to have enough cash to go and buy things at the store, right?
yeah, it was all cash. Yeah.
Okay, and then you had checks and you'd write a check, but the
Right.
process of writing a check made you think about how much money you're putting down, right?
Right. Made you pause.
Okay. But when you go and click on some of the major websites,
Yeah.
they make it frictionless, meaning you don't feel the exchange of the money. You don't have to count out the cash. You don't have to write the number on the check. You just see this magic box arrive in a very short period of time with no energy and effort to get up and go look at it and think about it or anything else. And it gets really easy to have the money begin to overwhelm you. and
Yep.
not planning in advance to save to deal with things, right? So I'll deal with what I have currently in the moment and not be able to think into the future of, hey, I'm going to have to replace the tires on my car, or hey, I'm going to have to change the oil on my car, or hey, I need to plan and save money for my vacation so that I don't come back in debt and that I can pay my rent and everything else, right?
And sometimes just to not play devil's advocate, but to explain the kids' perspective, um, they don't really always have the brain energy to do that because sometimes they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to go to these different classes. If they play a sport, they're trying to manage that. Their moms, the pressure of getting good grades. So to think in the future is just too stressed. Like I'm just dealing with today and now.
And I'm so overwhelmed with everything that happened
That's
today and I'm
right.
already exhausted.
Right. And yeah, so it becomes a big soup pot of anxiety, and self putting self down and things like that.
Yeah. Now, not everybody with attention deficit has bad self esteem, but
No.
all right, let's talk about life management.
Huh.
Let's talk about managing a home, managing dishes, managing food, managing just kind of laundry. Why are those things such challenges for attention deficit?
Well, again, those are multitasking items when you run a home. And so the dishes, the food, the shopping, the laundry, your kids' academic needs, your kids' psychological needs, and your kids' medical needs, all of those issues are all bundled together. And in your brain, that every single day, I write lists that say, make the bed, clean the bathroom, get Listerine. I mean, I am constantly writing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, items that I can check off every day. Although ADHD people don't love structure, I need freedom, but I also need structure. So I have learned to make my own structure of how to balance all these things.
I could not understand why my husband could not clean the bathroom. I'm like, I've showed you. Why is this hard? Start top, work down, spray the mirror, wipe down the mirror, spray the countertop, wipe down the countertop, spray the toilet, systematically go through. I assumed he could think strategically that way. And I would come home because I was the primary breadwinner and he was maintaining the house. And I'd be like, why is the bathroom not clean? This is not rocket science. So when I finally sat down and wrote out, here are the various steps for cleaning the
Yeah.
bathroom
Mm-hmm.
and gave him a structure for doing so,
Step 1, step 2, step 3.
yeah. And then I talked to parents about like, so you need to do a before and after. Here's what it looks like before. Here's what it needs to look like after. And let me give you a system for doing that. So let's talk about cleaning a bedroom.
So one thing that Cindy taught me, well, let me just talk to you also about the all or nothing syndrome. I'm
Okay.
all, I'm nothing. So what happens is that the clothes just start piling up on the floor, and then I wait for it to be I used to wait for it to be destroyed because it takes too much time to do that. And what you realize is that the all or nothing syndrome really puts you in that that deep. It's just like academia. It puts you in the deep pit, and it takes too long to get out. So I started thinking of life like Michelangelo. I'm chipping away at the statue, of David, and I'm not going to just do it all at once. I have to keep chipping away at it. But what Cindy taught me is that focus on the floor first. Everything comes off the floor first when you clean a bedroom. And I do that now even. I take all my clothes, I put them on the bed, put them into piles. I am obsessed with categories and piles and locations. I have a system where everything goes. It doesn't mean I'm perfect by any means, but I know where every article of clothing goes, everything in the kitchen goes.
Well, and with kids, I talk about, all right, so let's talk about how I work through a backpack. And often backpacks were like piles of just like crap, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we pull everything out on the desk and we pick up the first piece. Is it keep? Is it throw? Or is it save? Right?
Right.
And keep means I need it in the next little window of time, right? Like it's
Mhm.
homework that's got to be turned in or notes that we're taking in class. So I'm going to be adding to that very soon. Save means I'm going to need that to study for final exams.
Yes.
And throw is I don't need that anymore. And by simply creating those three categories, and
Yep.
we can systematically, here's the recycle bin, here's our long term savings box or file folder, and here's everything else. So we'd sort everything out on the table and get everything cleaned out. And then we would take a look at the what are we going to keep, and then we classify it by class, and then we put it in that section. Then we do the comparable thing with the save, and then we recycle everything else. And by doing that systematically, week in and week out, it was amazing that once kids got that system, we went from this constant, like, giant pile on the desktop to, hey, we can go every other week and look and see where you're at because you've now got a system and you can think through it more strategically and you're more consistent about putting things away, and then we don't have to do this as much.
But how did you teach? Like, I've learned categories myself. How did you teach categories?
I talk to kids about how do you think of things. There are people that organize clothes by type. There are people that organize clothes by outfit. There are people that organize clothes in all sorts of different ways, by season, whatever. However you think of them, that's the system I want to work with, right? And then we talk about, so how do you want to put these things together? Do you remember Garanimals, where you used to have the animals, and if you put the
Yeah.
two animals together, the outfits matched?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
told you that the colors were together, right?
Right.
So I've shown kids kind of Garanimal things, like let's talk about how we would put these things together and why. Um, and giving them options versus me coming in and saying, this is the way we're going to do it, which is the tendency to parents. I'm going to have you organize the way I think, not the way that you think. And then you're going to have to conform to my system, even though that doesn't work for you.
Doesn't make sense to you.
And so we have to sit down and say, you know, how do you want to think about things? Do you want to think about categories? Do you want to think about outfits? Do you want to think about frequency of use? How do you want to put it together? And how do you want a visual reminder of what's going to go there? Do you want a written label? Do you want it color coded? Do you have a particular mental way that you think about it when you put it in your bedroom? Do you want everything hanging in the closet? Do you want everything in the drawers? Like, how do you want to think about it? Uh, and helping them take ownership of it. And also coming back and saying, we can try this. And if it doesn't work, we can change it.
But everything we're saying here, when a parent just says, go clean your room, do you see the difference, parents, between what we're talking about? We're scaffolding a kid and helping them to develop. A lot of times when we say, go clean your room, that is not instructional. It's not helpful. It's not beneficial. It's a
Okay,
lot.
I have
What?
to tell the funniest story in the world around this.
Oh, no, not my story.
No, this is my
Okay.
husband.
Oh,
So before I knew my husband had attention deficit and I was living with him in Chicago, we were moving out here to Seattle. And he told me before he left, because he came out here to do some work on the house that we're now in, and said, I've packed up the garage. It's all good to go. You know, you really don't have that much to do. Walk out in the garage, nothing is packed. So I ended up packing the kitchen. I ended up packing up the garage. I ended up packing up 80% of the house. So he came home and I said, you have to do your office because it was just piles of stuff everywhere. He's like, okay. And he like goes in there and like 5 minutes later he walks out and he says, you know, I need to take the dogs for a ride in the car because it's been a week since they've had a ride in the car. And if I don't take them for a ride right now, it could be, you know, a long time before they could get a ride in the car again. I am like, what are you thinking? In other words, that was his way of coming out and saying, I am overwhelmed. I don't know what to do and I don't know how to attack this problem. And I didn't understand it and recognize it at the time. Like, he didn't even have a system for even dumping everything into a box to begin to think about how to pack up the room. And So I was not forethought enough to say, all right, let me come in and give you a system. Let's think about this strategically. And now I would go back in and say, all right, so we've got this giant room to pack up. So let me feed you well. Let me make sure that you're in a good state. Let's turn on good music or whatever you want to listen to. And now let's talk about what kind of system you want to use. Let's have a garbage bag for stuff that we're going to get rid of. And let's kind of systematically work through that together. He
So
still to
this,
this day tends to file by pile, meaning we have a spot in the house where a
Mhm,
giant pile of stuff builds up
mhm.
and then he gradually has to work it back down. And it's
Yeah,
still a challenge for him, even though I've labeled drawers in the workshop and everything else. It's still a challenge from him, and he has a tendency to just toss things when he doesn't know, right? And you get this attribution of you're lazy or why can't
right.
you? And the answer is you wouldn't say that to somebody that's wearing glasses. Why can't you just see better?
Yeah, and this whole thing, and I don't know what you think about, can you still have this problem without ADHD? You still have executive function. So executive
Absolutely.
functioning, so it's just a skill that needs to be taught, period. But when I have parents say he's not doing his reading, he's not doing his writing, there has to be more depth to it than just saying do it, do it, do it. If you sit down with the kid and you sit there and watch him read or he reads out loud to you, you'll find out why he's not doing his reading. If you
Yeah.
sit there and watch out why he's getting poor grades on his math test, you'll realize, oh, he doesn't, his homework isn't being done completely, and he doesn't realize he was doing the problems wrong in the first place.
By the way, there's a great book. I'm going to tell you about this book and then I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't buy it. But it's called Retraining Cognition, and it's designed for occupational therapists and physical therapists that are working with individuals with traumatic brain injury or other like stroke kinds of issues, which is also a traumatic brain injury. But the thing that I love about it is they come in a very concrete and simple way and talk about how do you improve iconic memory? How do you improve retraining executive function skills or executive skills? How do you build mental, not mental health, but working memory? Like they've got really good concrete ways to build this. Now, it's written for somebody with a master's level degree and it teaches concepts. If you're really into it, it's a great book. Um, if you're not into that kind of reading, it's an expensive book because it is a textbook, but you can tell how much I've loved it because the spine on it is completely broken and I have pages falling out because I use it so often. But it's got great articles that I will send parents to say, here's where we talk about memory strategies, or here's where we talk about setting up daily structure and schedule so that things get done, right?
Can I
Yeah.
say something? The reason why Cindy is so special in regards to how she teaches, and I would love to do another video on this because I feel like we're getting long, but I would, she has given me materials that are games, they're puzzles, they're a way of teaching executive functioning skills without the kids even knowing that they're doing it. And those are the things that I'd also like to do in another video to show them. It forces them to do
Yeah.
that planning skill. And it's
Internal
really,
dialogue for problem solving. Tell me how you're going to approach this problem. Tell me what your strategy is to win this game. How are you thinking ahead about what could happen and why?
mhm,
And that's one of the things that we miss out the most on. And that's where I will often send families, if you've got a kid with ADHD and you need to get intervention, the tendency is to try and go to a clinical psychologist, and a clinical psychologist training is more on self-esteem and how do you feel about your problems and all of those kinds of things. Alternatively, if you can find a speech language pathologist who has a background and looks at executive function skills from an academic perspective and a life perspective,
mhm.
often you can get a speech language pathologist to do this kind of executive functioning work with your child. And because it is a mental health and a medical condition, frequently you can get that covered through your health insurance and you can get this kind of direct instruction that your kid needs that's not you being the dictatorial um, through that avenue. And they've got the level of expertise to help kids build these skills and partition and step through things and problem solve. So that's rather than going to a clinical psychologist, not that clinical psychologists are not valuable and they can work on all these self-esteem issues that we're talking about. That's part of the picture. But how do we build this long-term skill set so that you're an independent functioning adult?
And this is not the medication piece. Like, even if you do go to a psychiatrist and get your medication, you still have to teach this. The pill doesn't make you all of a sudden have executive functioning skills.
Right,
It just allows you to learn them and apply them.
right. I mean, and if you think about it, early elementary school is teaching you things like how do I sit and focus for a long period of time? Like the reason they have circle time on the carpet where the teacher reads a story is to teach kids how to sit and listen
Mm-hmm.
at a short period of time and gradually lengthening it, right? And so if we have a kid with ADHD that's not learned to do that, when they move up into higher grades, that's more and more of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is a lifespan issue. Now, the more intervention we do, and the sooner we do the intervention, and this is not to say that everybody with attention deficit has massive issues and they can't control their money and they don't have good relationships and all that kind of stuff, but everybody comes at it in a different way, and we need to teach skill sets and we need to customize the instruction for the individual based on their needs. And that's the tricky piece. And so just because if you have attention deficit and you can manage it using X, Y, and Z tools, that doesn't mean those same tools are going to work for your child.
Yeah, a lot of parents assume, well, I have it and I survived, so my kid should be just fine. You can't assume that.
No, your methodology, your way of thinking, your life experiences. The other thing that parents forget all the time is how much more we expect of children in the education system today than we did 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. The amount that they're expected to amass. I look at what many of my students in some of the private schools in Seattle are doing, and they are doing college level work
Yes,
in high
absolutely.
school.
Absolutely.
And so like when I was in high school, it was a big deal when we had a class of 7 kids that did calculus in their senior year. And now I have students that are doing, believe it or not, I have a couple of kids that are doing calculus in middle school. Not a
Oh,
ton, a couple of them. They happen to be those savant kind of kids, but we have more and more kids that are doing harder and harder conceptual math earlier and earlier in the system, oftentimes beyond what brain development says they're ready for.
yeah.
But we keep pushing education down. When I went to school, you went to first grade to learn how to read. Now, if you walk into first grade and you're not reading, you are academically behind. So complex issues, lots to talk about. If you have questions for us and want us to do certain topics, we'd love to hear from you. And with that,
Thank
we'll
you.
leave it for now. Thanks.
Yeah.